Well, I'm sure there's an awful lot of 49er fans who woke up this morning, hopped on ESPN.com, and saw a cover story about Jimmy Garoppolo, a heartfelt goodbye and a shocking reunion, written by Tim Keown and Nick Wagner. And Tim Keown is nice enough to join us here on 95.7 The Game to talk about a interesting piece, which, got around a lot of stuff that we've been focused on. So some of it we knew, some very interesting details in there that we did not know. So, Tim, thank you very much for joining us here on Damon and Ratto. Appreciate your time this afternoon. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you guys for having me.
From all the conversations that you had with the team in the locker room, how strong of a sell job did the 49ers actually have to make to Jimmy Garoppolo to return as a backup quarterback, or did circumstances almost create a world where Jimmy was hoping that might happen?
I think by the time it happened, it had gotten to the point where both sides, or at least Garoppolo's side, really understood that there wasn't a whole lot out there for them other than a release and then maybe a signing from a team like Cleveland where he would play, part of the season and then end up having to give the job to Deshaun Watson. Obviously, it would have meant a new contract. There were a lot of unknowns there once the trade market for Jimmy died. So I think that, once the exhibition season ended without a clear opening anywhere, I think it became sort of a, kind of an angle of repose thing, right? Like it became the easiest thing to do is stay where it's familiar and see what happens. And as we know, things happen.
Turn your mic on, Ray. The segment always goes better when you turn your mic on.
It actually goes worse when I turn it on, and you know that. How much does Garoppolo bear responsibility for the market drying up? Based on your reporting, do you get a sense that he or the 49ers feel like he should have gotten the surgery earlier? Or do they sort of accept that, when it's a quarterback, you want to see if you can work it out without getting cut on?
I think my reporting in the conversations I've had indicates that the 49ers would have preferred he not have it at all. I think that was kind of the idea was, hey, we can trade you now, and then you can deal with it when you're not our problem. I mean, that's just kind of the way I think it shook out. And I think that Garoppolo and his people had to, make the calculation that they didn't want him being traded as damaged goods, and they didn't want to have to tell people he was healthy if they weren't sure he was healthy. And once, he gave it roughly a month to try to get it rehabbed without surgery. And when things didn't progress the way they expected or wanted, then it was kind of a no-brainer from his side. Now, the 49ers obviously would have been in a position to get something for him had that not happened when it did, because that is the moment when the trade market really died, was when he had surgery. And it's just bizarre how things happened, where now, they're all probably glad that it happened the way it did, given what happened on Sunday.
Tim Keown from ESPN here on 95.7 The Game. You mentioned that he was close to becoming a Washington Commander. Did you get any sense of what that trade package might have been?
No, I didn't, except that, at the time it was widely kind of accepted that the 49ers were looking for 2 second-round draft picks, which I think probably would have been a really decent haul, especially from Washington. So yeah, that was the talk, that was what they were demanding, or at least requesting. So I think it's probably safe to say it would have been something in that range.
That said, when the surgery came out, there was no interest in him at all, as I understand it, from anyone under any circumstances. How hard did Don Yee try to create a trade, or did he just recognize that there just wasn't a market, and in all likelihood, they were going to take the $7 million buyout and just have the year off?
Yeah, I think that was probably where they were at that point, because they were the ones who were also involved in the discussion to have surgery. Jimmy consulted with them, and it was it was decided that, hey, the best thing going forward was to have the surgery. And there was even a thought that, okay, this just might be a lost year, right? Your trademark is gone. They're going to release you. Then you're going to be free to decide if you want to go somewhere, right? I mean, he would have chosen to go somewhere, but who knows what kind of situation he would have been dropped in. And a lot of what they were doing was thinking about next year, that you sort of let your body heal, you let your reputation heal. Look Mitchell Trubisky's a perfect example. He goes from just being pilloried in Chicago to spending a year backing up Josh Allen, and all of a sudden he's, a reasonably hot commodity again. He's a starting quarterback, and that probably won't last forever, but you know what I'm saying? There was a thought there that they could position Jimmy well for 2023 if nothing happened immediately.
Brian Griese, who's a first-year quarterbacks coach, has got enough on his plate just being a first-year quarterbacks coach. For him having to also be an armchair psychologist to manage egos in his quarterbacking room and the very odd relationship that Lance and Garoppolo now share, it's an awful lot. Did you get to talk to Griese specifically for this piece?
No, I did not speak specifically. Now, my co-writer on this, Nick Wagner, has a relationship with Brian, but so he had talked to him over time. But we did not speak to him specifically for this story in the last week.
Were the 49ers obstructionist when you tried to get to talk to people just because it was such a hot button topic at that point?
They were not overly helpful, but so I would say that anyone outside the locker room was difficult. The locker room, you could get guys as you see them. There was no obstructionism there, but there were some people that I watched. I was in Chicago for the first game and watched Garoppolo on the sidelines and saw Clay Kubiak, who's the assistant quarterbacks coach. He was like with those two, with Lance and Garoppolo, every second when the offense wasn't on the field. I had gotten information that he had hosted a quarterback's dinner the night all this stuff shook out with the roster construction and Jimmy returning. I wanted to talk to him because he seems like the guy on the field with the most contact. And assistant coaches apparently don't talk. So that was that I ran into a roadblock there. I would have liked to have heard his insight.
Tim Keown from ESPN.com here on 95.7 The Game, talking about the cover story, the piece about Garoppolo returning to the 49ers after it looked like the divorce was all but certain. Here we are getting married once again. And really, Tim, I don't know how much you dove into this just thinking, what a story to tell from a sports talk standpoint. It's like we've been handed gold. There's just so much to talk about because this topic is just so original and different. And, no matter how you look at it, coming or going, there's something fascinating to talk about. You mentioned how, if Jimmy was this team's backup, he seemed reticent to play that role. He's been such a pro. I'm sure he would have played it very well. I'm sure he would have done everything he could to look like and actually not just look like, but be a supportive backup quarterback, imparting a little advice to the young kid. I think he would have done all those things. But then, a football season and human nature does take over. And if there were an element to struggling of Trey Lance in a multiverse, we're doing all our Marvel movies take place in the multiverse. I would have loved Tim to have seen the multiverse where Trey Lance is playing, struggling, and all of a sudden, the games are running through the hourglass like grains of sand. And would Kyle Shanahan have made a move, or would he stuck with his convictions of Trey Lance? There's the multiverse movie that I would have loved to also have seen.
Yeah, and all that is part of this whole, as you say, the the weirdness of the 49ers putting themselves in this position, right? They knew what it entailed. I will say that everyone I spoke to, and this was before, this was before and after the first game, everyone I spoke to really thought Jimmy was embracing this role. Like the guys that were on scout team, I mean, they were joking about him trying to be Justin Fields last week, and it was, that there was some humor involved in that. But they said he was all out. Like this was his thing. He really genuinely likes Lance. They have a good relationship. I don't think he would have been back if that hadn't been the case. If they didn't like each other, I think it would have been hard for the 49ers to sell this from either side, right? From the Garoppolo side or the team side. But yeah, I mean, I think that, this is a team that their window is like right now, right? I mean, they feel like they have a roster, really aside from the quarterback position, and you can argue that maybe it's different now that they're more equipped to make a long run in the playoffs with Jimmy than Trey. But I mean, I think we're speculating, but I would think that they would not have let the season go down the drain if they thought that Trey was the one taking it there. I think they probably would have made a decision to at least figure out a way to get Garoppolo on the field at some point.
I'm going to ask you to sort of encapsulate everything, because it sounds like Kyle Shanahan went to the table, made an enormous gamble, lost, and still gets to take all his chips back. Is that a fair assessment, that through no skill of his own and through a series of bizarro world accidents, he ends up no worse than he was last January?
That's exactly what it feels like. I mean, it feels like they took a gamble on the ceiling, right? They thought that Lance would be, and he still may be, the guy that carries the franchise for over a long period of time. I think it was clear, we didn't have it was a pretty small sample size, but I think it was clear that it wasn't going to happen immediately, that they were going to have to do whatever they thought was right to get him through games. And unfortunately for Lance, I think one of those calculations was maybe running him more than they either should have or would have liked. But yeah, I mean, I think that now you're looking at a team that, I saw like the Vegas odds as soon as Garoppolo is the starting quarterback, they changed. They're a better bet now than they were before. So it's really, it is a, it's a terrible stroke of luck for Trey Lance. It's a terrible blow. I mean, he loses a season right when he was having his chance, but yeah, as far as the team goes, I don't know that you're not looking at the drop off you would have if this was Nate Sudfeld. Then you'd have a catastrophe. But what Shanahan created was not a catastrophe.
By the way, we're a minute or two into our 4 o'clock hour, so we got to do the station identification. And Tim, all I can tell you is you can tell your colleagues back at ESPN that Ray is available for voiceover work. Listen to this top of the hour rejoiner.
You're listening to 95.7 The Game, KGMZ FM and HD1 San Francisco. Always live on Twitch, YouTube, and the free Odyssey app. Damn well better be free. Yeah, wasn't that magic?
Yes, it's just beautiful. I always thought you did that live, Ray. I didn't realize that was canned. I thought you just pulled it out every hour.
I don't do anything live. In fact, in many ways, I'm legally dead.
This entire interview has been pre-recorded, actually, Tim.
Talk about multiverse. Like I'm here right now.
Yeah. I'm not going to play the scenario, well, what if they win the Super Bowl? Don't they have to bring Garoppolo back in 2023? If they get to the conference final and Garoppolo isn't a disaster, do you get a sense that they've already made up their mind that they're going to try to move him this coming off season no matter what? Or have they abandoned all thought of trying to plan their way out of this, and they're just going to let stuff happen the way it happens?
Yeah, I would think that the last bit of that is probably, I think that, experience would indicate that that's probably the wise course of action to let this play out and see where it goes, because they made that decision last off season. You go back and listen to Garoppolo's farewell, and it was Like, it wasn't couched at all. He was gone. He literally said goodbye. And I think that, you know, to replay that would probably be a mistake on everyone's part if everything, you know, if what you're saying happens and they make a deep run into the playoffs. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty wild to think that, yeah, we could be talking next year at this time about similar circumstances.
Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. The more things change, the more they stay the same. All the cliches are in place. Tim Keown, ESPN.com. Great story on the inner workings of the conversations that happened about bringing Jimmy back. You talked to the leadership group, and somebody asked the question, well, what happens if Lance struggles? When Lance struggles? And we already kind of talked about that through the multiverse. Here's my last question for you, Tim. You know, you've been talking to athletes for decades, right? And you, yep, I think, in those conversations get a glimpse into how athletes, not just NFL players, but all athletes are wired. And it feels like most athletes are wired to have been put in the situation that Jimmy was put into and say, you know what, screw you guys, waive me, cut me, I don't want to play, I'm going to go play without you, you don't want me, I don't want you, I'm out of here. Jimmy never, ever did that. Patience, I guess, the virtue that brought him back to the Niners, or maybe it was a lack of marketplace. We can figure that out later. How rare is it to find someone at such an ego-driven position like quarterback be willing to just sort of let things happen and not try to steer things in their own direction?
Yeah, I mean, he played his hand as well as it could be played, and he did that by almost not playing it, right? I mean, he burned no bridges. He didn't demand to go to a certain place. He didn't, you know, F-bomb management on his way out.
Right. He didn't do the Screw Those Guys podcast that you always get these days.
Exactly. And he wasn't like, oh, I'm going to show everybody. You know, that doesn't seem to be his nature. And I think what you're getting at is that I think there are very few guys that would have come back under these circumstances, given what his place in the franchise was prior to this. You know, he's won a lot of games, you know, and he could have, you know, pounded his chest and demanded things or called people out, but he really didn't. And now, I mean, it looks, it looks brilliant. And I don't know him that well. I've been around him over the years, but I sensed, and I got it from other people too, that he seemed really, really relaxed as the backup quarterback. And so there might be a part of him that I'm sure he's thrilled in a twisted way to be back on top of the depth chart, even though it came at Lance's expense. But, you know, I do think that sometimes it probably feels good to not have those bright lights on you all the time, you know, and to just be the guy that has to just be ready instead of being the one that everybody, you know, the backup quarterback's the most popular guy. You know, everybody loves him. They wait for him to come in. So, you know, it's changed now, but I it felt like he was kind of enjoying stepping back from all that scrutiny.
I think you might be right. I really do. He seems as comfortable in his own skin in this role. In a role that you'd think would lead to him being uncomfortable, he never looked uncomfortable for a minute. Tim, great piece today. Thank you very much. Again, we sit on top of this story. We talk about it breathlessly 24 hours a day. To have new elements be brought out and the details that you brought him out in this story was really good stuff, man. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for having me. And credit goes to my friend Nick Wagner too, because we collaborated on this, and Nick was great. So he's the insider. I'm just the outsider.
Yeah, he stinks.
Nice job inside and outside. Thank you very, very much. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Tim Keown here on 95.7 The Game.